Welcome to Beyond the Walls podcast. I'm your host, Kylie, and I am so excited to be able to have this conversation with you to help teach you tools, ideas, support on how to go beyond your walls too. Are you tired of feeling stuck and trapped and like a victim in your own life? Maybe you need to find a new way to look at it. Look at your situation from a different angle. Maybe we need to learn and take a look to see how we can re-choose or recreate a life that is going to bring you joy and purpose and feel free and exciting. So let's get started on today's message. Welcome back, you guys. So I have a really fantastic, great friend that I have for us to listen to and learn from today. Her name is Michelle Carter. And, I was hearing her story. I heard it a long time ago. And I was like, wait, I need to hear more about this because I remember there being like a really cool nugget about it. And as she was retelling it to me, I was like, yeah, we have to talk about this on the podcast. And one of those things too, that I think I really want us to be able to hear from is that confusing space when we are committed to a plan or we have a dream or we have a goal and it just doesn't seem to happen the way that we thought it was going to happen or in the time when we thought it was going to happen. And this truly is that kind of a story. Michelle is an amazing inspiration of just her journey, her commitment to her dreams and her goals, but still finding the space and the time and the flexibility to allow it to go places she didn't expect or in the time in which she expected it. So, Michelle, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. The specific topic we're going to talk about is singleness and marriedhood, right? Like your journey from that point A to point B. And let's start, I guess maybe let's even go back to the teen years. Like maybe just tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe what did you think life was going to be like? Like what were your dreams and goals for your future when you grew up back in your teen years?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I actually prayed earlier this year to have an opportunity to share the God stories in
Oh,
my life. And I have two huge God stories in my life, and this is like part one of one of the God
mm,
stories. And so I feel like this is part of God's answer to my prayers. So um,
that's awesome.
so thanks for inviting me. But my name was Michelle Moody, and I was born in 1974 to an African American Air Force airman and a Japanese woman. And I'm the first of four children.
Okay.
And I was born in Japan. All of my siblings, all three of them, we were all born in Japan. And we settled in Massachusetts.
Ooh,
And I think I was around 12 years old or 11 when we came to the US. So we had
okay.
lived overseas. I was born in Japan. We moved to the US. After a few years, we moved back to Japan, stayed there for several years. And then my dad was stationed in Massachusetts. And it was there that I, you know, pretty much started thinking about what it would be like for me to, you know, go to school, become a doctor one day,
Mm,
you know, maybe have a family. I wasn't someone who played with Barbie dolls and dreamed of wedding dresses and things like that. But when I watched The Cosby Show, I was like, oh, I think I would want that. I was just really inspired by
yeah.
seeing two educated Black people raise a relatively
Mm,
non-dysfunctional family. So
yeah.
pretty much it was very simple. When I was a teenager, I just wanted to become a doctor because I loved anatomy and physiology. I loved science,
Mm,
and one day have a family that looked like the
yeah.
Cosby Show.
Yeah. I'm curious, your time that you spent in Japan, because I think the Cosby Show would kind of reflect our American ideals, like kind of life path. Um, were you young enough to just not really necessarily be influenced, or would the Japanese culture sort of be the same? Like, or was it different?
Well, the reason why I was drawn and attracted to the Cosby Show was growing up in Japan and living in Japan, having a Japanese mother, eating Japanese food, hearing the Japanese language. I felt very connected to the Japanese culture.
Mm,
And I didn't really know what it meant to be Black because I
mm,
lived in Japan.
yeah.
So, coming back to the US, you know, watching television, there's a lot of different depictions of what Blackness is.
Mm,
And it was very clear that for me at that time, the Cosby Show was something that really more attracted me to being and made me feel like, hey, that's what I would like to aspire to.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so um that's what it was like for me as a young person, as a preteen, as a teenager, like, that's what I would like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Were there many mixed cultures over in Japan, or was it a thing for you, or did you feel totally accepted and no big deal, like you just lived life?
in Japan, they are, they're all like fascinated by foreigners, so
Mm,
when you go there and then you're a child, I mean, it was nonstop, just, you're so cute, and giving me gifts, and here's a handkerchief, here's a candy,
wow.
very helpful. It was just like celebrated.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel like an outcast.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I was too young to maybe pick up on some of the nuances if there was anything like
Mm,
that. But
yeah.
I was a child. So I think it's a little bit different when you're a child, when you're,
Yeah.
3, 4,
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right, that was a fun discussion. That wasn't really part of our schedule, but thanks for
it's
sharing those
okay.
fun details.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so then as a teen, so you wanted to be a doctor, and you're like, okay,
Hmm.
so was that your plan first? Were you thinking, okay, I'll become a doctor first, and then if I happen to get married and have kids, that'd be great. Like, which part was more optional, or were they both optional?
I really did not. Which part was more optional was the married and kids part. I really did not think about that very much as a
Yeah.
child. I was just focused on my academics, doing well in
Mm,
school, piano lessons, and that's it. And trying to achieve. So I
yeah.
really, and I wasn't allowed to date when
Okay.
I was a teenager, so it wasn't really even part of an option for me.
Yeah.
So,
So then tell us, maybe then you graduate high school, then what happened? Did you go
so
become a doctor?
actually, I graduated high school and then I went to college and I majored in biology
Okay.
and pre-medicine, and I
Yeah.
did that. I went to one school in Boston and then I went to another school in Western Massachusetts for the last 3 years, and
Mm.
I got my degree in biology and pre-medicine.
So what kind of changed, or did it change much? Did your desire to get married grow in that season?
The biggest thing that changed my life goals or impacted my life goals was me becoming a Christian.
Mm.
Um, so it was when I was 15 years old that I decided um, to follow the lifestyle of a Christian. And
Mm.
so, um, just remember listening to countless stories of adults who had gone down the path of pain prior to following Christ.
Mhm.
And I understood from their testimonies that it was better for me to follow Christ's ways than my ways. So I
Mm.
wanted to learn from their mistakes. And
Yeah.
so I prayed at that time, God, please help me to be faithful through all the seasons of my life,
Mm.
through the teen years, the single years, the married years, and beyond, because I didn't want my circumstances to dictate, my devotion to Jesus, because I had seen many people kind of compromise or walk away or didn't get things they wanted. And so they just walked away from
Mm,
Jesus, or they wanted certain things. And so they decided not to follow Jesus. And so I remember
yeah.
praying that prayer as a young person, that I wouldn't allow that to happen to me.
Yeah. I love that awareness that you had at that age because I think just in part of my own story, I think I took that calling, but I had a much more fearful approach. And so I cut off a lot of parts of life that was like, in order to not risk falling away or not obeying Jesus, like, let me have this really narrow one track path. Right. And I think it got me caught like later on, then I got what I wanted, which was really great. But there was this other part of me that I had really compromised that I then later had to really kind of go back and resolve. So I share that too, just for you guys listening, that, you know, even if it's too late, you've already gotten yourself in a situation and there's regret and like, oh, I wish I could go back and redo it. You still get to redo it now. So just as a caveat, as we continue to hear this story, um, so how did that kind of transition for you then in the college days? Tell us maybe just whatever you want to during that season of life.
Well, I think when I became a Christian as a teenager, I had always, before that, I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to help people. I had this idea of becoming like a Cosby Show family. But then when I became a Christian, it added purpose to my dreams because I
Mm,
never saw myself as someone who could make a positive impact to other people. I never
mm,
had big dreams for myself outside of just let me just get a job and be responsible and that's it.
yeah.
And so it just helped me to see, you know what, I'm just not living for myself anymore. I'm made for a greater purpose. I'm here to glorify God with
Mm,
my talents. I'm here to shine brightly for Him so that others could have this hope, that
yeah.
I had.
Yeah.
So that shaped, okay, what kind of life did I want to have? And then I would read in scripture about these power couples like,
Mm,
Priscilla and Aquila. And I'm like,
mhm,
oh, I want to be like them. They're awesome. They're like a
mm,
power couple. And so
yeah.
if I hadn't become a Christian, I wouldn't have like read that and then had that
Mhm,
influence what my dreams were for the future,
yeah.
and what kind of woman I wanted to be. And
Yeah.
so it was after reading that, I said, I want to change the world with the gospel. I want to marry a man who wanted to do the
Mm,
same. And then also, I grew up playing the piano, and I didn't realize, I knew that I could sing because I sang in the school choir, but it
yeah.
wasn't until I went into the teen ministry and they had a teen band in Boston and they were singing a song. And I just went there just to watch them rehearse. And they were singing the song and they were trying to get it. And I just sang it on the sidelines and they said, "Hey, why don't you sing that?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay. And next thing you know, I was just singing and singing and serving and singing.
Mhm,
And it just expanded my world. I really believe becoming a Christian actually didn't narrow my world. For me, it expanded
mhm,
my world. I traveled. I did so
mhm.
much with my gifts and talents is because I start to see God made me for something more. And
Yeah.
so um when I moved on into college, I was passionate about making a difference for God, but I also wanted to be an excellent student. And so I
Mm,
made sure I was in the honor roll. I led a choir in the honor honors club choir.
oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Um, and I still, tried to be strong in my faith and really
Yeah.
influence others for Christ as much as I could as a
Yeah.
college student.
Yeah. When was your first boyfriend then? Because I know you dated a couple of people before you married Chris.
Right.
So obviously not in your teen years because that was
Well, yeah.
prohibited. So maybe like, so how was that kind of
It
journey?
wasn't until I was 26.
Okay.
So I
Wow.
went to college at 17 and I graduated at 21.
Yeah.
dated a lot of great guys. I mean, went on dates,
Okay.
but never felt a connection. Plus, I was just super focused on my academics and also just,
Yeah.
all my activities. But
Yeah.
then right after college, I actually decided not to pursue medicine
Mm.
and take up an offer to go into the full time ministry for my church. And
Mm.
I would serve in the college ministry
Mm-hmm.
and the singles ministry. And so
Mm.
I did that for 7 years. I did it for a year or two in Massachusetts, and then I moved down to Connecticut and worked
Wow.
down there for another 5 years.
Yeah.
And so uh, it was interesting because the culture in my church with being in the ministry is that you usually have a partner, and
Yeah.
eventually the partner becomes your spouse, or you're serving in that role with your spouse. And
Mm.
so there was a big pressure for me to feel like, okay, who is my partner going to be? Who's my spouse? Like I've had partners, but then they'd be
Yeah.
rotated out or they'd go someplace else or leave for
Mm.
whatever reason. So I felt pressure to find a partner, a life partner to be in this role and serving in the church because
Mm.
most of the women who served in the church were married to their husbands serving in the same role. And
Yeah.
I thought to myself, if I wanted to be in this position, which was my dream, I wanted to change the world, but I could not
Mm.
do it by myself. I did not see other single women in their 20s and 30s and 40s serving and leading churches. They could
Yeah.
only go so high, so
Yeah.
far, because
Yeah.
ultimately, I, from my vantage point, the men mainly dictated which ministry you would serve in. And so
Mm.
that added more pressure to me like, is my
Yeah.
guy going to be a youth minister or is my guy going to be a church leader or is he, so it
Mm.
was interesting to think of who my future spouse would be from that
Yeah.
vantage point.
Yeah. Do you feel like in that, did it ever feel like pressure, like negative, like shame and you're failing? Or was it pressure of like feeling the need to fulfill this role? Like, I hope he comes soon so that I can then go on to the next stage or like the next step. You know what I mean? Or how would you describe that pressure, or maybe like what was the pressure tempting you to do?
um I think the pressure of wanting a spouse, wanting a partner was first came from my dream of having that Priscilla and Aquila type of partnership with someone
Mm, yeah,
and being, two by two going with this person and we're just changing the world together. And
yeah.
then seeing it literally happening and being inspired by these couples and being like,
Mm,
wow, that's what I want. That's what I want. Where's mine? So it
yeah,
didn't come from a shame, it came from an inspiration. The
yeah.
desire of my heart came from inspiration and things that I've actually
Mm,
seen in right before my eyes and
yeah,
wanting it myself.
yeah, yeah. So where did you go after that? So you moved down to another state, you're serving, and now you're like anticipating your partner.
So I moved down to Connecticut. That was a great transition. I was still in my early 20s. And then I started serving. And then I was
Mm,
working on staff, but they were always finding someone temporarily to lead with me. And then finally I said, well, let me open my mind to this first guy here. So I was 26 years old when I had my first boyfriend.
okay.
And we dated for just 6 months and then
Mm,
we broke up. And that's when I started my list of what I really wanted in a
mm,
partner, in a husband. And so
yeah.
after 26, I think I served in the church for 4 more years, and then
Okay.
I was laid off,
Okay.
and I had to come up with some new dreams at that point.
Mm. Where'd you go? What was your new dream?
So at 30, I was laid off, and thankfully, amazingly, I was able to enroll in an accelerated nursing program
Mm,
and get my RN degree in less than a year. And
mm,
so, amazingly, they took all of my credits, even though I had been out of school for 7 years,
wow.
and said, "Yep, that's fine, and go ahead and start this program." And I came out a year later, taking the nursing boards and passing and becoming an RN. It was a nurse practitioner program, a 3-year program, but I stopped after 1 year.
Wow.
And then I think about a month after that, I started dating boyfriend number two, and he
Okay.
was in another city. He wasn't in the same
Mm,
city in the state that I was in.
okay. Wow. So I guess, how many relationships were you in before Chris?
I guess I would say, let's see, one, two, three, four. And then I
Four.
met Chris. He was my fifth.
Okay. Speak to me a little bit about the feelings, maybe the emotions, or was it difficult for you or not? Maybe it wasn't difficult. Like, because we get really sentimental to the dream. And that's like the like being like rigid and like it has to turn out this way because we just want the dream to come to fruition versus like clearly you're committed to it being done the right way because you were willing
Hmm.
to walk away from these other situations. But I would imagine like there's this tug of war going on of like, this is supposed to be the one. I want it to be the one, but you don't want to settle. So talk to us a little bit maybe about like what was that like?
Yes, absolutely. So, okay, by the time I was 30 and I had established my career, started my career as a nurse, I was, I had to dream new dreams. I was like, I'm not going to go down this path of being in the ministry. So that new transition kind of kept me happy for a little while, right? The new
Mm,
career, because before when I was in the ministry, I was happy making less than $30,000, living on a mattress, moving around, having bunches of roommates. I just was like totally content with that.
yeah.
But once I got into my early 30s, going into my mid 30s, I established my career. I was going to the gym 3 times a week. I was taking care of myself. I had money in the bank. I had a bed
Mm,
to sleep on. I bought my car cash. I was still
mm,
serving a lot in the church. I had a niche, um, reaching out to people, sharing the gospel with them. And I still felt like, hey, but I still want this
mm,
husband, this partner. And I would look around in the church and I'd get discouraged because
mm,
the fish in this pond was a lot smaller than the ocean outside the church.
mm.
And so all the while, since I was 15, I was abstaining from sex and all
Okay.
things sexual
Yeah.
as to not awaken that part until I was married.
Yeah.
And so it was a struggle because I was healthy, I was attractive, I was a sexual woman in
Mm,
my 30s being pursued in and outside of the church. And I remained tied to my commitment to
yeah.
obey Jesus's instructions on no sex and everything in between until marriage.
Yeah.
So it was really, really challenging. I struggled
Mm,
with anger. I
mm,
struggled in entitlement, confusion, bitterness, comparison, compromise. I felt behind somehow,
mm,
like, oh, I have roommates still, and I felt like others were living my dream. And
yeah.
so I often internalized that as, oh, maybe I need something to grow in or I was doing something wrong.
Mm,
So,
yeah. It's what sounds like you had very clear goals. You had clear boundaries and convictions about what you are wanting and why you are wanting it. but then you had low lows of like just growing weary. Like it almost kind of sounds like at some point you're like, I'm just weary in the waiting. Would that be a way to describe it?
Weary and all the other things, angry, because I would, again, it was so much of me comparing myself to others. I would say to
Mm,
myself, but I've been here since I was 15. Or
mm,
that person left, found a guy outside the church, came
yeah.
back, and now living her happy
Mm,
dream. And I'm still
mm,
here. Should
yeah.
I just leave? Maybe I should just leave. Go find someone and
Mm,
come back. But then I knew I didn't really want that because I
mm,
knew that the kind of man I wanted him to be from the beginning, you know?
yeah.
So there was a lot of things. There was times where um I would go on these dates with guys and it was so I was in compromising situations. Nothing ever happened, but I'm like, why did I do this? Like I'm sitting here
Mm,
by myself with this guy and I'm like, oh, yeah, I need to do a physical because I'm learning this in nursing school. So can you be my patient?
mm,
Let me listen to you breathe and trying to get, getting a little too touchy feely, um, and things like that. Going, watching
yeah.
movies by myself at night with a random guy, and then he's trying to play footsies with me, and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh no, it's not that kind of party.
Yeah.
So I was just, I walked the
Dabbling.
line. Yes, I
Yeah.
walked the line a few times, and then
Mm,
also, you know, I had I had been faithful to God for a while, for 15 years or something by the time I was 30 and then 20 years by the time I was 35. And I would even get advice from people, from leaders of churches and says, go ahead, go on that date and see how it is.
mm,
So I remember going on a date with a doctor at my hospital. He was a great guy and we sat
yeah.
down, we talked, and I just told him what my priorities are. And I said, yes, I would like for you, to come to church with me. And I really just having the same foundation of faith is very important to
Mm,
me. And right there, he was like, no, that's
mm,
not. He says that's for him, that was at the very end of a
mm,
relationship as far as we need to start on different levels. And for me, that was the foundation. And
mm,
so I would meet these great guys, accomplished, driven, athletic, handsome, successful Black
mm,
men
yeah.
driving nice cars, but their foundation wasn't, they didn't want to start
Mm,
off with Jesus. And so I had to walk away.
wow.
And
What was the hardest? Was the doctor the hardest? The one that you just shared, the hardest one to walk away from? Or was there somebody else that was like the hardest, the most tempting
no,
scenario?
there was the hardest one was someone who was actually, um, we had the same foundation
Mm-hmm.
and he was really, I mean, I remember the first time seeing him, I was just like, he's so cute. And he was really gifted and talented. And he was in our campus ministry. And a lot of people were excited about him and wanted to, raise him up in the
Mm,
church. And, but he quickly graduated and then he went off to pursue his career. And then he left our church and he did something else.
yeah.
That was the hardest because to me, he was like the closest that I would want. He had
Yeah.
everything. He had everything I wanted, just the personality, the
Mm,
giftedness, the drive, the ambition, the success, the people, personality, everything. But
yeah.
we just didn't connect on the God piece. But for
Yeah.
years, I mean, I would date a guy and then he'd pop up in the situation. He'd be in another state. He'd like
Mm.
pop up and I'm like, maybe I'm supposed to
Still
be with him.
around.
And then
Yeah.
then I'd date someone else and then he'd pop up again. Then he'd reach out to me and then he'd say, hey, I'm in town. Do you want to have lunch? And I just happened to start a relationship with another guy. So I was like, the timing wasn't good. So I was like, maybe it's just a timing thing. But yes, there was one person that
Yeah. Which I wonder looking back, so because it sounds like he showed up pretty early on in the
yes,
story. So
yes,
I wonder, I'm hearing even now, like I wonder like maybe he was a blessing in the sense of like keeping the real vision alive, right? Like this really could be possible. Like
yeah, I love that.
this is you know, like they kept the dream alive, right? Like the what you were really desiring and all of those things. And then luckily the timing never matched up, right?
Right.
Because you're
Because
like, man.
he was everything except for that connection with God piece. And
Yeah.
then he left. And
Mm,
so um, every other person I dated after that didn't compare to him as far as his his strengths.
yeah.
But they had the God piece.
Yeah.
So, and that was more important to me. So that's why I
Yeah.
dated these other guys.
Mm. Did you ever feel tempted to feel like you were having too high of standards or like you were being unrealistic?
Yes. I was tempted to think that way because I was still trying to figure myself out, you know.
Mm,
Um, there's people who meet their husband as their first boyfriend ever and they meet them and they marry them, but I wasn't that person and I had to learn some things about what I wanted and what was important to me and
mm,
I feel like that was a blessing for me to be able to date these different men in this protective situation where I didn't give and offer my entire body and soul and life
yeah.
and money and everything to them, but I was able to date them, get to know them,
Yeah.
be in a committed relationship with them, but
Yeah.
still have my body and my heart and my soul and learn, okay, you know what? This is what I really like. This is what I don't care for. This is what I would
Yeah.
really want. And
Yeah.
so, but at the same time, the voices around me, a lot of people would say I was really picky, or they would
Mm,
say, you're waiting to marry Jesus. And these weren't just my peers. These were people that I looked up to that would call my advisors.
yeah.
And this is where I really needed to go with my relationship with God. I needed to pray
Mm,
and I needed to go with my heart and what the Spirit
yeah.
told me. And so that was one huge thing because people just kind of be like, what's your problem? He's so great. He's got this. Like, why aren't you in love with him?
Yeah. Yeah. It almost sounds like I like what you're bringing up. And what I heard in that was the extreme importance of each of us owning our decisions and allowing advisors to be advisors. Like our, they're not Jesus, right? Like they're kind of, they just are pressure. And I think I can hear in some of your story, and I don't know how difficult they were to realize in the moment, but at least for you looking back, to hear those moments where there was like a lot of ownership of your choices in your life and you being very intentional with not settling and compromising just in your values as a person, as a Christian, and really working to not let any of these one particular areas like lord over you, right? Like become the most important part of it. And leaving, then that also left other humans to not be more important either, right? Even if it's the people we're looking for, the people you're comparing yourself with, the people where you're like, why did they get it, God, and I didn't get it? Like at the end of the day, it sounds like that really was a strong anchor for you that allowed you to still keep owning your responsibility of your life and not getting sucked down into victimhood. Because I think, like, and it's one thing to be tempted to feel like a victim and to feel like I'm being robbed and to feel like I'm missing out or, you know, like God's not blessing me. Am I being cursed? I think you almost alluded to that earlier, right? Like, did I do something wrong for you, God? Like, have I not served you enough? Where's my blessing? Right. It's so at the end of the day, though, it sounds like you had really built an amazingly faithful, strong foundation and trust in doing it God's
And
way.
that truly came from the voice of God. And what I
Mm,
mean is there'd be a time where I remember throwing a huge party for one of my boyfriends.
Mhm.
And I mean, it was huge. Like 100 people came, family members of his came, all these people came. It was like, it might as well have been like an engagement party, you know?
Mm.
And then there was a voice that said, "Do you want to marry him?"
Mm.
And I was like, "I don't feel it."
Yeah.
And I had to learn to listen to this voice that would come up from time to time with different situations
Yeah.
and be quiet and still enough and to hear it and to
Mm.
pay attention
Yeah.
to that voice in my heart
Mm.
and to not ignore it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes as Christians, we can read that scripture, the heart is deceitful above all things.
Mm.
And so any feeling that comes in your heart, you're supposed to just ignore and, oh, it's just see.
Mm.
But I think it's more just paying attention to what is being brought up in my heart and being able to discern what it is. And
Yeah.
so there was a time even when there was a woman of position and authority and spiritual maturity, and I really looked up to her, and she led a whole church and everything. And I said, I don't know why I'm still single. And she
Mm.
said, well,
Not be
maybe you're
married.
just not meant to be married. And if I was in a different place spiritually, I may have completely absorbed every word she said, brought it into my heart, mourned the loss, and just accepted that
Mm.
as my fate.
Yeah.
But something in me said, nope, I'm
Mm.
not going to accept that. That's not for me.
Yeah.
Not that I had anything against her, but
Yeah.
I said, no, that's not, I'm not going to give up on the desires of my heart.
Yeah.
And
That's powerful. And I appreciate you leaving the room that like she wasn't necessarily being malicious. Like again, you had the freedom to accept it or not, right? And really like, is
mhm,
this do I want to take this advice or this nugget or this wisdom that's being handed to me deep down into the depths of my soul? Is this going to become my identity or is it not? And still leaving room. And I think so. It's also okay, y'all that are listening, like maybe that was your message for you, right? Like, but again, if we take it back to God, like, is this really what do you want me to hear? How do we continue to be discerning, flexible, but committed to a goal and a dream and not giving up? So,
yes.
okay.
And
So I'll just say before we run out of time, let's hear your amazing story then. So how did you ever find the one? Tell us like kind of where did
okay.
that happen? Like
You want to hear that story? Oh my goodness.
that one.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was already 36
Okay.
and broken up with boyfriend number 4 and just super sad and wondering what was going on with my life. Decided
Mm,
to go on a vacation to Jamaica with a bunch of single friends, guys and girls,
mm,
and really use that time to work through my pain.
yeah.
And so I brought books on forgiveness, things, and I
Mm,
just read and read and read. I cried and cried. I journaled. I could not physically pray because I was so discouraged. And I remember the book of Ecclesiastes because Ecclesiastes kind of talks about what's the point of life.
yeah.
Because at the very end, it says, this is the whole of life. This is what the point of life
Yeah.
is. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to read the book of Ecclesiastes. God, why am I here? Why did I
Yeah.
do this at 15 years old and I'm still doing this? Like, why don't I just take life
Mhm.
and just do it my way? What's the
Mm,
point? You know?
yeah.
And so I read Ecclesiastes, and when I read chapter 5, verse 18, um, and I think I have it here. I can read it. It says, this is what I observe to be good, that it's appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God had given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot, and to be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. They seldom
Mm.
reflect on the days of their life because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart. And
Mm.
at that point, I said, I'm not happy. I'm not occupied with gladness of heart. Yes, I've had such amazing experiences as a single woman. I've traveled,
Yeah.
I've gone on vacations, I've, earned a good income, I made best friends, but this one part of my life I still am hoping for and I
Yeah.
want. And when I looked at this passage, I said, okay, I need to work backwards. What
Mm.
would get me there? What would get me happy? God
Yeah.
would. How? By recognizing that I have a gift from God. I had
Mm.
jobs and possessions. I was sitting in beautiful Jamaica and I
Yeah.
had the ability to enjoy them, but I was missing this one thing. I was missing accepting my lot. And I was
Mm.
striving and I was fighting for more in my life, and I just wouldn't accept where I was in the moment and enjoy it. And
Yeah.
so this acceptance would serve as my gift from God. So I was just like, I just
Mm.
got it on the beach that day. I shared it with everyone. I was like, I'm just going to accept where I am and be happy. This
Yeah.
is how I'm going to get that gladness of heart. And then
Mm.
literally 4 months later, I went on a singles retreat to Miami with a friend. And on the first day there, Chris was standing in the lobby of the hotel and he
Okay.
knew my friend and he said hi. And I just thought, oh, he's a cute guy. And then we all went to dinner and he shared how he joked how he was half Japanese. And I said, so nice to meet you. And he said, oh, no, I'm not really half Japanese. I just say that because I love the Japanese culture. And I said, you love the Japanese culture? Why? He's like, well, I studied it in college. I'm like, oh, you studied? He said, well, I minored it. I'm an engineer. And
Yeah.
then my girlfriend said, yes, he works for Toyota. And all I could think of was, oh, Toyota dealerships. Okay, he sells cars.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was like, oh, okay, so he sells cars. And so she's like, no, he's corporate. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but okay. And he was at the singles retreat in Miami, um, where a bunch of people were meeting for New Year's Eve.
Oh,
We met there. We bumped into each other a couple of times. He pulled me aside. He said he wanted to take me on a date, but he wasn't able to because he wanted to encourage a whole bunch of people.
yeah.
And um, basically, by the end of that weekend, um, I was intrigued by him because one
Mm.
of the things that I had placed on my list that was very important to me is someone who would appreciate my Japanese culture.
Yeah.
And he lived on the East Coast where I was. And so I
Mm.
said, hey, um, gosh, I would really love to meet him again, but he had already left. And he had
Mm.
already left to take three guys back to the airport in his rental car.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, I don't have his information. I don't have his phone number or anything.
Yeah.
But he had gotten my email address previous to leaving because he says he did Bible studies and that he wanted to
Mm.
share them with me. And I was like, okay, you want to share a Bible
Nice.
study with me? Um, but I prayed a prayer at that moment. I said, God, I want to say goodbye to him, but I don't know where he is. I pray that he's in the lobby by himself. And I
Mm.
prayed that prayer because I knew he was with three guys taking them in his rental car to the airport. So it
Yeah.
was the exact opposite of where he would be. He would be in the parking garage with three
Mm.
guys. He
Yeah.
wouldn't be in the lobby by himself. But I just prayed the most opposite of where he would be out of
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah.
And so as I was at the bottom of this escalator, I go up the escalator, I pray this prayer. I'm going towards the lobby because I'm like, well,
Mm.
maybe I'll be able to say goodbye to him. And
Yeah.
who was standing in the lobby by himself was Chris Carter. And
Wow.
so as I was walking towards him, there's chills on my arm. And I said, what do I say, God? And then I heard a voice say, just speak from your heart. And I just
Mm,
walked over to him and I just said, it was so great to meet you. Great to meet someone who understands, who appreciates Japanese culture. Maybe we could have sushi sometime when you're visiting your friends in New York City. And that's
mm.
when he pulled me aside and took his sunglasses down like this. And he said, I'm coming to Philadelphia and I'm going to take you on a date. And literally from that time, we went on a date. He came to Philadelphia. He went on a date. And then he flew me out to Cincinnati where he was living. He asked me to be his girlfriend on our second date. I said no.
Why?
He asked me he, because I was like, this guy is too excited. It's the second date. He's asking me to be his girlfriend.
Slow your
And
roll.
I'm 9 years older than him. So I was
Oh,
like, young buck, he needs to, slow
yeah,
down a little bit.
yeah.
But then he asked me to be his girlfriend again on like the fourth date. Then he asked me to be
Wow.
his girlfriend again. Finally, the third time, I said yes. And literally the next date, after he asked me to be his girlfriend, Memorial Day weekend, I think. Um, the next weekend, he took me to meet his parents,
Wow.
and I was like, "Whoa!" And then we were literally married the same day that we met in the lobby of that hotel at that conference.
Yeah.
365 days to the day we were married.
Wow. Did
And
you
it
go to the
wasn't even
lobby of
planned
that
that way.
hotel in Miami?
No, we've been since. But
Oh, that's cool.
um, I wish I could share, so many of the details, but he
Yeah.
has, he is everything. Remember that first guy when I was in college who had
Yeah.
everything? He was cute and he was ambitious and there's this and this and this, but we
Yeah.
just didn't connect on the God piece. Chris is
Yeah.
all of that, but the
Mm,
foundation, that God piece is there. The
yeah.
first thing, I mean, he sent me an email saying, I'm going to send you Bible studies.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, Bible studies. And
Sounds
that's how we
good.
corresponded. We didn't even talk on the phone at first. We sent
Mm,
emails back and forth about the scriptures, talking
yeah.
about God and how the
Yeah.
scriptures impacted us and how it changed us. And then a month later, he asked for my phone number.
Wow.
So God gave me everything I wanted and more. I mean,
Mm,
the list was all compiled from all these other great guys that I
yeah.
dated. I
Yeah.
wanted a black man. I wanted someone who could dance salsa and merengue, and someone who was smart, ambitious, understood my
Yeah.
culture. And he's all that. He
Wow.
speaks Japanese. He taught salsa and merengue.
Oh my gosh.
He works two jobs. He works as an executive for Toyota and he's a professor at college. So he's super
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
He loves the Bible. He knows the scriptures like some guys know sports
Mm,
stats.
mm,
And so for me to reflect on this time and reflect on him and reflect on this answered prayer,
mm,
it's above and beyond what I
yeah.
expected,
Mm,
even as a teenager at 15. And
yeah.
so it builds my faith in God so
Mm,
much. And I'm just so
yeah.
grateful that I did it his way.
Yes. And still to wrestle through, like, I love I mean, not to sound cliche, but it's not cliche. Like, I think it's really real life, right? Like when we finally just surrender, right? It's like like when we're just so like focused on trying to get this one thing to happen and it just isn't happening. And it's like the minute we just relax enough, right? To like, okay, I'm not going to force this issue. I'm just going to trust the timing. Whenever it is the right time, it's the right time. Like things just naturally then can just show up. And I love that piece of like contentment with still keeping the goal, the dream alive, right? But we're not going to compromise. We're not going to settle in that space, you know? Like what an amazing victory. And I feel like, too, what's important to remember, or something that I always try to hold on to, is that we rarely regret following through when it does work out. Where, like, it's kind of like when we do,
Mm-hmm.
like, we want to just work out, right? Like, just take care of ourselves. Like, we set a goal, we bomb on ourselves and don't go, we're only left with shame and regret. We push through, like, nobody ever regrets actually going to the gym or eating the right food or waiting for the right time or not giving into fear, right? Like, there's always the reward at the end of the waiting and not compromising. And so I think if we can just remember, like, in our story, and I think you have a lot of those moments where you saw God working victoriously in all of those ways, like, you were honored and blessed on the journey in these other ways, right? To kind of
That
keep
is
your hope
true.
alive in this space. It's
Yes. And
really
you know
cool.
what? I think the thing that I got really good at, I think the way that I waited is that I never stopped asking.
Mm.
I don't think we should wait and just resign ourselves and stop asking. And
Asking
one
who?
thing asking God for your
Mm.
dreams
Yeah.
and acting on them. And
Yeah.
so the waiting is not inactive. It's not sitting on your hands. It's not just waiting for
Mm.
the UPS man to deliver your dreams to you.
Yeah.
But in the waiting, I got really good at asking.
Yeah.
Like a child that always asks mom for something. Mommy this, daddy this, can I have this? Can I? I'm like, I'm going to
Yeah.
be that child with God.
Yeah.
He can
Yeah.
handle it.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
and I felt that way when you were telling your story. And I was like, you asked for the wild opposite dream for Chris to be in a certain position, but you went to that place, right? Like, how many times do we ask and we want, but then, like, like, you're sitting and wait, like, not being active and you're waiting, right? Like, if you didn't go to the lobby, you wouldn't have seen him there, right? Like, you had to actually go to the lobby then where you expected him to be, right? And so, man, yeah, taking that action in the
And
waiting.
facing your fears.
Yeah.
I was afraid when I saw him in the lobby. My thing was, I was afraid. And I said,
Mm,
what do I do?
yeah.
What do I say? And I just had to keep walking. I had to face my fears. And I remember when we were even dating and he proposed that I moved to Cincinnati to date
Mm,
him, and we weren't engaged yet. And I had done that before in another relationship where I had
mm,
moved in a dating relationship and it didn't work out. And I
yeah.
told myself, I am never going to move again for another guy if there's not a ring on my finger.
Yeah.
And so he asked me to move. I was faced with that fear again. And I was faced with
Mm,
fear over and over in these different relationships in different ways. And I had to live by faith. And I brought it before God and I prayed, it's like, what could happen? What would happen if I didn't take the step? If I
yeah.
didn't try, would I have regrets? And I said yes. And I
Mm,
would rather not have the regret.
yeah.
Having regret of what could have been would be more painful than the pain of not getting what I wanted. And
Yeah.
so I decided, I remember when he asked me to move, I said, yes, I'll move. And so when he came down to help move me to Cincinnati, that's when he
Mm,
proposed.
mm,
He proposed the day before I physically moved to Cincinnati to date him. And so
wow.
God hooked it up. He
Wow.
said, okay, you're not moving without a ring on your finger, but you had to face your fear
Yeah.
and live without regret. And so
Mm,
a lot of this had been for me falling down, getting back up, facing my fear, trusting in God, walking by faith.
yeah.
And, and I'd
Wow.
rather do life with God than without him. It's so
Yeah.
scary
Yeah.
without him. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing up the point of the fear of it working out. Because when you were talking in the beginning, when you were like going to the lobby, I thought you were going to say you were afraid he wasn't going to be there, right? And then you have to face the disappointment that you were actually afraid he was going to be there. And I think that brings up such a huge, important thing that I want you guys to all hear and reflect on in your lives. Like, we cannot avoid big things being scary. Like, but so often we cut ourselves short because we're trying to just shortcut the fear, right? Like, let me just not go into that scary situation. But it's easy for us to cut things off and to fear it not working out, but we just as easily, there's still fear of it actually working out, right? Like, it might be different kind of fear, it might be a different kind of reason, and the healing might be different, but fear is not like our guide, it's a gauge, right? And then
Hmm.
either way, it was going to be a faith journey for God, because if you prayed that prayer and he wasn't there, you were going to need to get down on your knees and pray to God, like, why wasn't he there, right? Like, that was going to be a whole nother issue. And so you needed God for the next step either way, whether he was there or he wasn't. And I think, how do we take that into our lives going forward? With every step that we take has to be a trust. It's a faith journey.
It is.
Love that. I love that. Well, so as we finish out, any one last thoughts that you would have or advice you would give to a woman who might be in those single years, or even just, and maybe even just speaking to our unanswered dreams, right? Like, it doesn't have to just be singlehood or marriage, but just like when we feel like we have that dream, like, what would you say to them to keep their hope alive?
I would say first to go back and study the character of God.
Hmm.
It goes back to God for me because he is who I hold on to. He's my rock, my anchor. He's the hand I hold life with since I was a child, before I made best friends, before I met my husband. And
Hmm.
so my dreams, um, I go with him. Um, and so go back to his character. Who
Yeah.
is God?
Yeah.
It's not. And so whenever I started questioning where I was in life, or disappointments, breakups, or losses, death,
Yeah.
anything that was negative, or having to wait, I always went back to the character of God. Who is God? Who do I know him to be?
Mm.
From my study, but also from the experiences that I gained over the years.
Yeah.
And one thing that I established very early with that question is God is good, that
Mm.
he wants to give good gifts. He's a good father. He loves me. And for him to be good, he doesn't want to harm me.
Yeah.
And so um going back to his character, and then
Yeah.
and then knowing that that's who you are presenting your requests to, it
Mm.
helps me to have hope with what's
Yeah.
going on. And then understanding, for example, for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I would look around and no one's like dated as many times as I have and broken up. Like, oh, there must be
Mm.
something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so uh just always having a curiosity to want to grow through
Mm.
the struggle time, or a season, or a trial,
Yeah.
and be try to be aware of any patterns that you see, because
Yeah.
God is probably trying to reveal something about an area that he wants you to be aware of in your life, but
Yeah.
also he might be trying to share with you a part of his character that you're not aware of yet,
Yeah.
who he is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it does. I love that. Well, and I think the importance of keep going back to that, because I think it's really important that we grow. We grow every year. Like, our character changes. So God remains the same, but I think our understanding of him changes, right? Like, our capacity to let him tell us who he is changes as we grow, And so I think I really
Hmm.
appreciate that last bit, that like you couldn't keep holding on to like your 15-year-old faith. Like it was a great foundation at 15, but like you had to keep deepening that every step of the way. And I think that that is really even the offering that I hear, that I want you guys listening to know. Just like where I said in the beginning of like, oh, well, I didn't have that. Like, I feel like I chose the smallness life, right? And I had to have my own transformation, my own coming back, and my own like re-believing, like my own Ecclesiastes time. Like, what is my purpose and my identity right now? It's not too late. It doesn't mean you have to like undo regrets that you had in the past, but how do you want to live now where you're not stuck in regrets the next time, right? Like every step of the way, what am I afraid of? Who is God? Who does God say he is? Who does he say I am? And then what am I going to do about it every step of the
Yes.
way? So,
Yes.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your story. We might have to have
Absolutely.
a part two, because I know what your part two is. And it's pretty awesome, y'all. So we might need the second half of Michelle's happily ever after. Because obviously you've been married for how long now? 12 years. So I'm sure amazing dreams have been answered in 12 years. So hang on someday for part two, y'all. All right. Well, thanks so much, Michelle. Good chatting. Bye bye. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that that brought you a lot of encouragement and some information to be able to apply to your own life and to start taking down those walls that are in your way. What is that one thing that you want to take on and take with you today? I would love to hear from you and to hear about it. Follow me here on the podcast so that you're alerted and don't miss any upcoming episodes. You can find me on Instagram or even on my website at beyondthewallspodcast.com. If you want more help, I offer one-on-one coaching and would love to connect with you. Until next time, have a great day.